Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us in our 10-minute Bible lesson. Now, today we're going to be looking at some verses that we believe will be an encouragement to you. And these verses are found in the book of Psalms. So we're going to look at Psalm 3, verse 3. Let's go ahead and read it. So it says this, "But you, O Lord, are a shield for me, my glory, and the one who lifts up my head." So we see in this verse that the psalmist declares what the Lord means to him and what the Lord is doing for him. In fact, when I look at this verse, I see three things that are listed that he does. He says that God is his shield. He says that he glories in God. And lastly, he says this, he says that he lifts up my head. Now, what do all of these things mean? Well, first of all, let's just take the shield. David states this fact that God is his shield. So he believes that God is the one who provides protection for him. Now, we know a shield was used in battle, and it was used in warfare. And we also know that David was a warrior, and he had been in many, many battles. And I'm just wondering if through all of those battles and all of those wars that he was in, that it dawned upon him and he began to realize that there was someone, that would be God, that was watching over him and protecting him and keeping him safe. You know, he was really, really successful. And God was watching out for him. Now, we also, that is to say, you and I, we need God as a shield for our protection. And what kind of protection do we need? Well, one of the things that we need to be protected from is the enemy for our souls. Because we have an enemy, we have something and someone and some things at war against the most valuable part of our life, and that's our very soul. And we need a shield for that. Now, also, there are many other things that we come in contact with that we need, this world that we live in, we need protection from it. In fact, there are many unseen dangers. There are things out there that we don't even know may happen. And so we need that too. Now, there's another thing that David says in here, and the second thing he says is that that God is his glory. Now, what in the world does that mean? It's a little harder to define. It could be that David means this, that because God was his shield and provided so many victories in battle, that it somehow brought him glory from all of his successes. Because when you're really, really successful in so many and different kinds of things, people will lift you up and think you're really important, whether it's in music or in business or whatever, or in sports or whatever it may be. And it could have been battle. And so people could have been, glory in David. But I really don't think that's what David meant at all. Here's what I think David meant. I believe that he meant that he gloried in God. That is to say, his boast in life was in God and what God did for him. And I think that's what it means when he says that his glory. Now, the third thing, to me is just kind of an exciting thing, and it's an encouraging thing to read about. It's especially good, and that is to say that David said that God was the person who lifts up his head. Now, what does that mean? Well, sometimes, and I'm sure you have had this happen, our heads droop or our heads hang down. And there could be for all kinds of reasons. And sometimes it's just hard to have our head lifted up. And so it's interesting here in this psalm that David is saying what God does for him. And the third thing he does is he lifts up his head. Now that means, I think, that he lifts his spirits up, or he encourages him, or he fills his heart with hope. And we all need that. And I think that's just really cool what David has said about God. Now let's go ahead and look at another psalm. Now this psalm is Psalm 17, verse 5. And it's a short psalm like the other one. So David says this, uphold my steps in your paths, that my footsteps may not slip. Now the first psalm was a psalm of acknowledgement of what God was doing for David. But this psalm's different because this psalm we see David making a request to God. You could almost say that David was making a prayer to God. Now, what in the world would David request that God do for him? And it's mentioned right here in this psalm. He's actually saying this, that his steps would stay in the paths of God. That is, in the right path. So I'm thinking what he means by his steps, it just simply means this. It means the walk of his life. Now, all of us, you could say, are on a walk or on a journey, and this journey is called life. And it's really important, the paths that we take. And it was important to David. So David wanted to ask God that God would somehow ensure his feet stay on the right paths. That is, the paths of God. Now, it's something that we ought to consider as well. Now, I think that includes the way we live and the conduct of our life and where our feet take us, where are the paths it takes us. So I think that that's important for us today, for us also. So we should want to live our life in a way that's pleasing to the Lord. I'm sure that that's what David wanted. He wanted his life to be looked upon by God as God approving where he's walking. So how do we do that? And that's a good question. How are we going to do that? Well, let me just say we can't really know what God's ways are unless we study God's book. And so it's really important that we regularly, carefully study the scriptures. And we should do that. It should be a regular part of our life. And the second thing is that we should listen to the promptings of the Holy Spirit that lives within every believer. And so if we do that, we'll begin to understand and to learn about the paths of God. So I think that's really, really important. So David gives us the reason in this verse as well. So he makes a request to God that God would keep his feet on that God would help him to keep his feet on God's paths, and then he gives the reason for it. What is that reason? The reason is this, that my footsteps may not slip. And that's his reason. Now he understands that as long as his feet are on the pathways of God, they're not going to slip. So if they get off of the pathways of God, there's a good chance that they could slip. And so he realizes the possibility of that happening. And I think that's really, really wise in David, and it's wise in us. Now, Paul said this in 1 Corinthians 10:12. Therefore, let him who thinks he stands take heed lest he fall. What does that mean? I think it means this, that we can have too much confidence in ourselves. And when we do that, there's a likely possibility that we can stumble. And who wants to stumble in life? You see, our dependence, the thing that we depend upon shouldn't be upon ourselves, but it should be upon the Lord. And so we need to have a good understanding. This would be a wise thing for all of us to understand our faults and our weaknesses and our susceptibilities. So I hope that you've enjoyed these Psalms. I think that they're good Psalms. And we'll be looking at some more, try to find some more Psalms that are encouraging to us. We need to be encouraged in these days that we're living. I hope you have a really good week and you'll join us next time.